Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that this program is being recorded and it will be available on our Facebook, YouTube, and our website after today. I'm just going to give people a few minutes to trickle into the room and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we'll get started and people can obviously join us when they are available. So welcome back everyone to the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum's virtual lecture series talking about race matters. Join the conversation. My name is Meredith Horsford and I'm the executive director here at the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum. We are so happy to continue this lecture series. As you may know, it's something that we started in August of 2020. And it was so popular and so successful that we brought it back in February of this year. And now here we are doing our third iteration of this series. So thanks so much for anyone who's returning and welcome, of course, to any newcomers. This is a 5-week series that centers around reestablishing sites, introducing an inclusive narrative to cultural and educational institutions. Each week, we have hosted a different speaker or speakers from various fields, including historic sites, art, archaeology, and preservation, followed by a question and answer session. One of the most important topics throughout history, and certainly in recent years, is the topic of race. It influences our lives historically and certainly in the present, which is the reason that we began this series last summer. We at the Dyckman Farmhouse Museum feel that it is really important to have and to facilitate conversations about race, even though sometimes they can be challenging. Our goal for this series has been to encourage everyone to come together, learn from one another, and continue the conversation. We would like to thank everyone for attending the series, and we've learned about various topics of the Black experience throughout New York. We are grateful, well, and beyond. We are grateful to offer a platform to share inclusive stories to our community, to our city, and to those visiting from all over the world. Before we get started, I'd just like to familiarize you with Zoom, although I'm sure you know already, so that you get the most out of tonight's lecture and to make sure you get your questions answered by our speakers. Please make sure to use the chat box feature at the bottom of your screen to say hello to the other attendees and to ask Melissa, our Director of Development and Community Engagement, any technical assistance questions that you may have. During the lecture, if you have questions for the speaker, please put those in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will likely answer those all the way at the end of the talk. Again, thank you for joining us this evening. We feel strongly that our programs remain free of charge so that they are accessible to all. The response to this lecture series has been overwhelming, and there is clearly a need for us to talk more about the issues that divide us and the issues that unite us as Americans. As a small nonprofit organization, we rely on grants and donations to support these programs. This event is made possible by funding from the New York Community Trust. We are grateful for their contributions that have assisted us in the continued success of this series. This fall 2021 series is also sponsored by the Bowery Residents Committee, or BRC for short. We have worked closely with BRC and community members over the last year to bring awareness to the Inwood African Burial Ground that sits between 211th and 212th Streets on 10th Avenue in our neighborhood of Inwood. This is the potential new location for a BRC shelter for people experiencing homelessness. To learn more about BRC's important work and community efforts, please head to the link that Melissa has posted in the chat. If you would like to make a donation to help us to continue our community-focused programming, it is greatly appreciated. We are also selling t-shirts, one of which highlights the names of the enslaved and free people that lived and worked on the farm, with their names on the front and say their names on the back. Our newest t-shirt also features the artwork of the I Was Here team. They were here with us presenting in week 2 of the lecture series, and it is overlaid on an image of the Dyckman houses here in Inwood. You can scan the QR code on your screen with your phone, or you can also click on the link that is shared in the chat. A purchase helps support our cause and furthers research and educational programming on the topic of the enslaved and free people highlighted on the t-shirt, as well as our partnership with the I Was Here team. Tonight, we are joined by Dr. Ruthie Dibble and Dr. Tiffany Momon. Dr. Dibble is an art historian and curator at the Chipstone Foundation in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, an organization dedicated to the study and interpretation of early American material culture. Her curatorial and scholarly work explores the role of craft in the creation of assertion of individual, colonial, and national identities in early America. Dr. Tiffany Momon is a public historian and assistant professor at Sewanee, the University of the South, and founder and co-creator of the Black Craftspeople Digital Archive, a Black digital humanities project that centers Black craftspeople, their lives, and their contributions to the making and building of America. Throughout her career, Momon has lectured on the subject of Black craftspeople at organizations such as the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts, and others. Tonight's presentation is titled Troubled Like the Restless Sea, Frederick Douglass and the Profusion of Luxury in Early America. Over 150 years after the publication of My Bondage and My Freedom, Frederick Douglass's rhetorical genius still offers new insights into American art and history. As co-curators, our speakers illuminate how a passage from Douglass's autobiography became the basis of a collaborative curatorial intervention at the Milwaukee Art Museum that explores the troubled status of luxury goods in early America. Douglass's words, along with those of other writers who bore witness to the injustices that shaped luxury goods in early America, offer new ways to think about the intersections of slavery, settler colonialism, and the profusion of luxury that filled many American homes in the 1800s. Prompted by Douglass's observation that luxury goods of enslaver households were troubled like the restless sea, the speakers will explore how undercurrents of power and profit shaped iconic examples of luxury goods, from the first porcelain made in America to the ornate furniture crafted in New York City for Cuban plantations. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the discussion over to Drs. Ruthie Dibble and Tiffany Momon. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Meredith, so much for having us. And thanks also to Stephanie and Melissa and the Dyckman Farmhouse team. It's a pleasure to join you for this important series.
And I would say likewise, thank you so much for the invitation, and a special thank you to everyone working behind the scenes to make this talk happen tonight.
I think you can all see my screen. Oops, I need to stop share for 1 second. Here we go. All right, so we're thrilled to be speaking with you today about Troubled Like the Restless Sea, a long-term exhibition of works from the Chipstone Foundation's permanent collection that's now taking place at the Milwaukee Art Museum. In the gallery, we center the perspectives of Black and Indigenous writers from early America to explore legacies of slavery and colonialism in objects from the Chipstone Foundation collection. The show features 18 works of British and American decorative arts. Decorative arts is a modern term used to describe elite luxury objects. And these objects range in date from around 1660 to actually 2015. The vision for the show and its title were inspired by a passage from the 1855 autobiography by Frederick Douglass, which he titled My Bondage and My Freedom. And as so many of us know, Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist. He was an activist for Black and women's rights. He was a literary genius, and he was one of the most famous people in the world in the 19th century. So he's a rich subject for further contemplation. The seed of this show came several years ago from a book that I had read called Out of the House of Bondage, The Transformation of the Plantation Household. It's written by Duke University history professor, Dr. Tavolia Glimpf, and it analyzes power relations between Black and white Southern women in the antebellum, Civil War, and Reconstruction eras. And as I was reading it, I was stopped in my tracks by this sentence. Cultural nostalgia sometimes gives priority to what Frederick Douglass called the seeming, and Renato Rosaldo called the elegance of manners, both of which in fact sit atop relations of dominance and subordination. This passage caught me because it perfectly encapsulated an ongoing problem at museums that collect historical decorative arts, a problem that museum interpretation often perpetuates. And I'm going to explain this with a quick example that's of an object that's in our show. So decorative arts objects that museums acquire, they often acquire them because they're thought of as beautiful and exemplary in an aesthetic and sometimes even a moral sense. And the way that these objects are valued and interpreted promote nostalgia. They promote a sentimental longing for the past. So we could look at this beautiful chair that was purchased by the Salem, Massachusetts merchant Elias Haskett Derby around 1797 for his mansion. It's delicately painted. It has beautiful colors on it. We could describe it as graceful and light. This chair is in the Chipstones Foundation's collection. And in fact, there are several of these chairs from this set that are at very prominent museums and collections in the United States. The museums that steward these collections have, through interpretation over many decades, fostered a reputation for Derby as one of the most enlightened merchants of the early United States. His estate is described as this fantastical space where there are flowers growing from all over the world. There's polite parties. The MFA Boston has a period room that's very much related to this house. But this understanding of the chair is steeped in nostalgia and this kind of the sense of seeming, because Haskett was actually deeply invested in strategies of creating relations of dominance and subordination. In this case, this is an affidavit by the free Black man, Salem Orne. He lived in Salem, his name is Salem, and he's declaring that Elias Haskett Derby most cruelly beat, bruised, and evilly mistreated a young woman named Rose who was enslaved in the Haskett household in Salem, Massachusetts. The reasons for this abuse, as this describes, is that Rose had married Salem against Derby's will, and for this he was punishing her and also threatening to ship her off to Carolina. When I read this and I think about the way that these objects, similar objects, decorative arts objects, are interpreted often in museums, the metaphor of laundering comes to mind. So when we talk about objects like this chair as simply beautiful or finely crafted, we're concealing the origins of a transaction or altering information to make it appear more acceptable. And without critical interpretation, Derby's beautiful objects in these museums launder his reputation. They obscure the truth with nostalgia. So in thinking about this and reading Glimpf's book, I thought if Frederick Douglass, who is an expert witness to these dynamics, has something to say about seeming cultural nostalgia, I wanted to know more. And digging into Tavolia Glimpf's footnote, I saw Douglass's My Bondage and My Freedom. So it's published in 1855. This is his second autobiography. Douglass was born into slavery in Maryland in 1818, and he courageously self-emancipated at the age of 20. His subsequent activism, including his writing, changed the course of history. He's widely thought to have influenced the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, and more. His biographies are unflinching portrayals of his life and his abuse at the hands of his enslavers. They also interwove larger lessons about the devastating truths and human costs of enslavement. And these lessons were addressed very generously to enslaved people who would live before and would live after him, but also to enslavers, and lastly, to white Northerners, who he felt should be taking a more activist stance against what he had experienced in the South. So between the age of 6 to 9, Douglass is enslaved at Y House, which is a sprawling plantation on the Chesapeake Bay and the eastern shore of Maryland. Its collections are storied in American decorative arts. This is an example of silver from Y House's collection. It was one of the most massive plantations in Maryland in this period. In a section of his biography, he calls the deceptive character of slavery. He talks about what he witnessed there as a young boy. And he sets up this contrast. So he talks first about like the luxurious furnishings, the rich meals, the finely dressed enslaved people that all created what a visitor to Y House might experience, what a white visitor to Y House might experience. But then he reveals the truth about this experience. And he says, "Can it all be seeming? Alas, it may only be a sham. This immense wealth, this gilded splendor, this profusion of luxury, this exemption from toil, this life of ease, this sea of plenty, what of it all? Are the pearly gates of happiness and sweet content flung open to such suitors? Far from it. The poor slave on his hard pine plank, but scantily covered with his thin blanket, sleeps more soundly than the feverish voluptuary who reclines upon his feather bed and downy pillow. Food to the indolent lounger is poison, not sustenance. Lurking beneath all their dishes are invisible spirits of evil, ready to feed the self-deluded gormandizers, which with aches, pains, fierce temper, uncontrolled passions, dyspepsia, rheumatism, lumbago, and gout. To the pampered love of ease, there is no resting place. What is pleasant today is repulsive tomorrow. What is soft now is hard at another time. What is sweet in the morning is bitter in the evening. Neither to the wicked nor to the idler is there any solid peace, troubled like the restless sea." I was struck by how much materials and objects are interwoven into this passage. You have gilded splendor, profusion of luxury. Then you have this contrast of the hard pine plank with the feather bed. And I started to think about this as Douglass recasting the Lloyd's lavish lifestyle and ornate furnishings as nothing more or less than the symptoms of the moral disease of slavery. So Douglass's words are an expert and understudied analysis of white Americans' ideologies and pathologies around race, their own and the race of the people who they enslaved. And at Chipstone, as we started to think about this, we decided that we wanted to center Douglass's quote and delve into the collection to critically examine what kinds of histories are in our own decorative arts. We started with the premise that objects in the gallery have unresolved and troubling histories. We also wanted to, as Douglass did, trouble some of the standard ways of approaching historical decorative arts that perpetuate exclusion and inaccuracy in the past and the present. And as preparing for this, I noticed that we've been thinking about trouble in a positive way very much recently because of the phrase good trouble, and thinking about how we can do this work of thinking about trouble as something that has potential too. So these aims could not have been fulfilled without co-curator, Dr. Tiffany Momon, who, as we've just learned, is a leading expert on the lives, artistry, and labor of enslaved and free craftsmen in early America. So I'm going to pass this along to Tiffany.
Thanks, Ruthie. So when I was invited to join this exhibition, I was immediately drawn to the curatorial plan of telling both a decorative arts story and an inclusive story, about all of the people behind the objects, including enslaved people and indigenous people. And for me in the work that I do, this was paramount. One of my most significant criticisms of the decorative arts field was that it did not do nearly enough to tell the stories of the people of color behind the objects. And so this exhibition not only provided the opportunity to tell these stories, but it also provided a framework for engaging the public and using visitor identification interpretive techniques by providing visitors with the tools that they needed to relate to the stories, to find relevance in the stories, and to find authenticity in the stories. So during the planning process for the exhibition, I was suddenly struck by the idea of voice, because after all, we are using Douglass's voice here. And so I wanted to include as many voices as we could to aid us in our interpretation, because I see value in letting people tell their own stories. And so to do this, we added quotes throughout the gallery on the walls and on the exhibit labels. And so again, voice is a powerful tool. And I was inspired by Douglass's voice and my own thoughts of the many purposefully silenced people who had experiences with the objects on display and objects like the ones on display. Next slide, please, Ruthie.
So from here on out, we're going to unpack some of the interpretive strategies and stories that we told with objects in the gallery. And what we wanted to start with is this desk and bookcase that was made in Baltimore, Maryland, around 1800. A traditional decorative arts interpretation would focus on the extremely high quality of this piece of furniture. It's made of exotic woods that would have been imported from abroad. It has these beautiful painted glass panels on it. But there's a lot that we don't know about this object at the same time. We don't know who made it, and we don't know who owned it, because often with decorative arts objects, we don't have a lot of documentation. But we wanted to think about what we did know. We know that this object must have been owned by someone very wealthy. And we knew also that it was made in a state where a majority of wealthy people enslaved people of African descent. We also know what it was used for, in a sense. In the most basic sense, it was used as a desk and also a bookcase. So it stored papers and books. So we started to ask, even though there's a lot we don't know about this object, what happens if we consider it from the perspective of Frederick Douglass, who was enslaved in Baltimore himself? And I think one of the most significant passages in Douglass's autobiographies is his description of learning to read. And this moment where the people enslaving him, husband and wife, took away his reading materials after he had begun to read. And he says in that passage, "From that moment, I understood the direct pathway from slavery to freedom," as in he was referring to reading.
And this summer, I happened to be working on an article about enslaved craftspeople and the objects that they took with them. And I was particularly investigating books, enslaved craftspeople who self-emancipated with books. And so whenever I see a desk and bookcase, such as this one, in a decorative arts exhibition, I'm immediately thinking about access, right? How people in the home, excuse me, might have access or not access the contents of this desk and bookcase. And as we can see through this example, there is a lock on the bookcase and the books are hidden behind green curtains. And so this summer, as I was reading various literacy laws, I do want to mention that they vary according to time and location. And by 1795 to 1810, the time in which it's believed this desk was created, there was no written law in Maryland prohibiting teaching of enslaved people to read and write, although there was a law that outlined educational gatherings of enslaved people. But despite the absence of a written law, teaching enslaved people to read and write was still frowned upon, as we saw through Douglass's examples. But what also stands out to me about this desk and bookcase are the images on the front panels there of justice and prudence. prudence being the ability to govern and discipline oneself by the use of reason, and justice being the quality of being fair and reasonable, and fairness in a way that people are treated. And so neither of these cardinal virtues were accessible to enslaved people, and this desk and bookcase acted as one of the many daily reminders of that fact. Next slide, please. And so here we have what we're calling our Douglass lessons. And this is Douglass lesson number 2. And that's to center enslaved men and women's experiences. And so you have on screen here a chest on chest from Rhode Island. And this chest on chest pictured there to the left was made to hold valuable textiles. And it represented the combined wealth of 2 of Rhode Island's most prominent slave trading families. It was commissioned by the politician and slave trader Jabez Bowen, whose wife Sarah Brown was the cousin of John Brown, slave trader and ardent supporter of slavery. And John Brown is, of course, a member of the family from which Brown University takes its name. And so Sarah's marriage to Jabez in 1762 helped solidify the joint business ventures between the families, among them the shipping and selling of enslaved people. And so this chest on chest, with its beautiful shell carved drawers, corkscrew flame finials, and scrolling pediment with rosette carved ends, represented the wealth of the Bowen family. Each morning, Jabez and Sarah would have awakened and looked at this chest in their bedroom, a private space in their house. No visitors to the home would have ever seen this chest, yet the Bowens still purchased it just to admire it themselves. But beyond the story of just the Bowens is the story of Anna, the 74-year-old woman the Bowens enslaved at the time of their marriage. Pictured on screen in the middle is Anna's grave marker in Newman Cemetery in East Providence, Rhode Island. And that grave marker reads, quote, "A Negro servant to Colonel Jabez Bowen, aged about 80 years. Though a good master, I was a good slave. I now rest from labor and sleep in my grave." The inscription on her grave marker reminds us that even in death, Jabez Bowen expected her to continue to labor for his reputation by reminding everyone who visited her grave that he was, quote, "a good master." Additionally, this chest on chest also reminds me of the other enslaved people whose names have escaped the documentary record, who would have placed clothing in this chest. They would have cared for it, cleaned it, dusted it, and the like. And the profits earned from trafficking thousands of enslaved people permitted the Bowens to purchase furniture such as this, even though they were the only ones in their household who would actually enjoy it. Next slide, please. And so our lesson here is to interrogate leisure. And so tea tables, such as the one pictured to the left of the screen, became popular in elite American homes in the early 1700s, where they functioned as gathering spaces for wealthy women to host social events centered on the social ritual of drinking tea. Even when folded flat, their gleaming mahogany and fine carving communicated the attributes of refinement, wealth, and a life of ease, as Frederick Douglass described it. In Charleston, South Carolina, where this tea table was made, white women and men actively engaged in tea table chat around these tea tables. Together, they used this seemingly harmless leisure time to discuss strategies for governing their enslaved households. The enslaved men and women who inevitably served their tea are underexamined witnesses of these fraught conversations that determined the fate of friends, loved ones, and sometimes even themselves, as seen through the example of Harriet Jacobs and a quote from her memoir, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, on screen. And Jacobs wrote, quote, "As I entered the room to spread the tea table, I heard him say, 'Don't wait any longer. Send for them tomorrow.' And my suspicions were correct. My children were to be brought to the plantation to be broke in." What Harriet Jacobs describes is how these conversations over a tea table such as this one often occurred with no thought given to who might hear these conversations, further illustrating the disregard enslavers had for the presence of enslaved people. And to the right of the screen here, we have a transferware dish that again depicts this leisure. And if you can see there very closely, you have a couple sitting on a love seat with a tea table in front of them. An enslaved boy stands to their side, dressed in an overcoat and a turban. And in his hand, he is holding a kettle full of hot water in which to make their tea. Out in the distance in front of them, 3 children play. And when we look at this platter, what we see here is the depiction of leisure, once again, a leisurely time, seemingly enjoyed by all. But what we know when we interrogate that is that that enslaved boy was not sharing in the leisure like the rest of the people on the platter were. Next slide, please, Ruthie. And so if we continue thinking about this tea table and its origins in Charleston, South Carolina, and when we consider the city of Charleston as an actor in the story of this tea table, we are presented with a multitude of stories that speak to understanding the effect of place on decorative arts objects. When this tea table was made, Charleston was nearly at the peak, it really was at the peak of its prominence. And some of the evidence that I uncovered doing research for the object's label reveals stories of people bringing their tea tables to a park near the Battery in Charleston and leisurely enjoying their tea in large groups. However, we know that this leisure and luxury came at a human cost. And also displayed on screen is a 1774 painting by Thomas Leach titled A View of Charlestown. And that painting decorates the wall in the gallery behind the tea table. And so if I interrogate this painting, my first question is, well, whose view of Charlestown does? What is missing from this painting, with the exception of 3 people near the bottom, are all of the enslaved people who outnumbered whites in South Carolina 4-1. Leach advertised in 1773 that, quote, "This view will be so exact a portrait of the town as it appears from the water, that every house in view will be distinctly known, and that nothing might be wanting to render it most complete. Yet it is even more incomplete, despite Leach's stated commitment to accuracy. Notably missing from this painting are the numerous slave ships that would have been docked at Charleston's wharves. During the transatlantic slave trade, 40% of enslaved Africans brought into the United States passed through Charleston's harbor." Next slide, please. And so here we have our 4th lesson, and that is to look beneath the surface. Now, most people would look at the yellow teapot on screen and see, a teapot made to look like a pineapple. And the English potter Thomas Wilden was especially well known for his teawares cast in the shape of botanical specimens, like the teapot pictured on screen. The British first encountered pineapples growing in their natural habitat when they established sugar plantations in the Caribbean in the 1600s. The fruit remained rare in England because it was difficult to ship and costly to grow. For English customers, the rarity of pineapples in Britain and their association with the abundance of the Caribbean made this teapot a symbol of empire, wealth, and world travel. However, for the enslaved people whose free labor produced the profits that fuels the British Empire, pineapples represented bondage and physical exploitation. This brightly glazed teapot evokes what Frederick Douglass called the Sea of Plenty, that characterized excessive wealth in the age of slavery. While its refinement and the bright yellow glaze hide the cream color of its creamware body, they also hide the brutality behind the pineapple's 18th century reputation, encouraging us to look beyond the surface. And also displayed on screen is a blue transferware charger made by Enoch Wood and Sons in England. And this transferware charger depicts a scene of calm waters, boats, and boatmen busy at work, and a castle off in the distance. Seashells adorn the border of the charger, and a banner near the bottom left reads, quote, Cape Coast Castle on the Gold Coast of Africa. Cape Coast Castle was a British trading post in modern-day Ghana, where merchants exchanged a variety of commodities, including blankets, spices, gold, and enslaved people. In real life, however, the scenes and activities at Cape Coast Castle were anything but the idyllic setting displayed on the charger. The castle was a prison where enslaved men, women, and children lived shackled in dungeons before their forced migration to the Americas. For many enslaved people, Cape Coast Castle was the horrific last memory of their ancestral homeland they saw as they were taken away on ships like those depicted on the charger. In his poetry collection titled Cape Coast Castle, Ghanaian poet Kwado Opoku Agaime wrote poems that sought to challenge images such as the one depicted on the charger. His poem Eclipse describes the dark history of enslavement and the slave castle. He wrote, quote, "It was dark then, it is dark now. Give memory nothing, and it is darker still tomorrow." And what resonated with me about that line is that he highlights the truth of the site very succinctly. It was always dark. It was always dark. But people, such as those behind the creation of the platter, chose to see this site as something that it never was and never will be. And he finished the line with a call to action. Quote, "Give memory nothing, and it is still darker tomorrow." So if we don't give justice to memory, the site will remain dark in the future.
Thanks, Tiffany. I'm gonna talk about two more objects and then we'll wrap up and hopefully have some questions. This lesson is identify the source of wealth. So Chipstone collection includes this fascinating three-legged chair that is from the 1600s. It's thought to have been made around 1660 in Connecticut, then colony of Connecticut, by someone named John Elderkin, who was a builder, he was a carpenter, and he ran a mill for sawing wood. This all happened in Norwich, Connecticut. And as I was researching this chair, I was thinking a lot about deforestation and how American decorative art scholars have done really strong work looking at histories of mahogany, the mahogany trade, and how that impacted both enslaved people who were forced to log the mahogany in the Caribbean and the indigenous people whose lands were devastated by this timber industry. And I was thinking about how when we look at chairs like this, we should also think about them as participants in deforestation, or the people who owned and made them as participating in deforestation, but just closer to home. Because New England was transformed from a place of old growth forests into a place of fields over about 150-year period by European Americans. And as I started to think about that and research this chair, I thought, what would it look like to talk about this as literally made of pieces of a New England forest that had belonged to indigenous people? What I found was that idea really had a really concrete history, and the history I'll briefly share about this chair, I have a feeling it applies to a lot more early American furniture. So I hope it's something we can continue to explore. John Elderkin, his kind of comfort as a wealthy established person originated in the fact that when he moved to Norwich, Connecticut in the 1650s, the town agreed to give him a plot of land if he would improve it, which means to clear it of trees, and also if he would allow indigenous peoples in the area to continue to access the land because it encompassed their burial ground. And what you can see on the far right is an image of this land now. The Mohegan have reclaimed it and made a memorial there. So what we have is someone whose wealth is coming from real estate that has been given to them and from the clearing of that land. And we think that he made this chair to furnish his household in this period. So we can think of this chair as being made from the timbers of an old growth forest that rightfully belonged to indigenous people. Over years, the rights of the Mohegan when the Pequot were set aside and by white settlers, and their access to this land was decreased and it became fully elderkins. And he then went on to found a kind of New England family dynasty. I was also thinking about how in interesting ways, not only is this tree made of wood, but it also looks a little tree-like. It has this interesting kind of trunk-like back leg. It has these back splats that are branching out like trees. And then it has these knob ornaments that look rather like acorns. And when Elderkin sat in this chair, he would have aligned his spine with the trunk. He would have symbolically supplanted indigenous relationships to the forest with his own, just as he had in real life, and really adapted this material to the kind of family tree metaphor that he was the founder of an American dynasty that we know was built off of appropriating indigenous land. One of the examples of other art authors that we've included in this gallery is William Apes, who was Pequot, and he published the first known autobiography of a Native American person in the United States in 1829. He has really, and it's called A Son of the Forest, and he has really beautiful passages about the forest and deforestation. So we include this quote in the label: "The forest, which once furnished them with ample means of subsistence, has been leveled to the ground." And then the last object, the last lesson from Douglass is don't confuse history with nostalgia. So talking about this object last because it may look old, but it's actually the most modern piece in the gallery. This is because it's a fake. An antiques kind of dealer named Harold Gordon, around 2010, he took an actual piece of early New England furniture from around the 1840s, which you can see in this comparison image on the left. And he doctored it into a piece of folk art that he called a Civil War memorial. So it's important to understand that in the same way that he doctored this object, an original object, he doctored an existing story. And that story he outlined on the dedicatory plaque. You can see the detail of it there. So he found out that two brothers from Connecticut, John and Wells Bingham, had enlisted in the Union Army in late August of 1862, and within just a few weeks had fought at the Battle of Antietam as totally green soldiers in September of that year. Antietam is widely known as the deadliest day in American history. There were a shocking number of casualties from that day. One of them included the brother John. So Wells continued to serve, and he survived the war and went on to become a successful businessman. And Gordon then also knew that Wells had died by suicide in 1904. So Gordon, the faker, invented a story that Wells's veteran friends had made him this cabinet memorial to commemorate John. And he fashioned it with falsified relics of the Civil War and carved bone pieces to create this kind of folk art extravaganza that is similar in its kind of eclectic aesthetic and the incorporation of relics to other kinds of domestic memorial objects made to commemorate Civil War soldiers in the 1870s and 80s. His fakery is a fascinating story, but as Chip Stone has started to delve into this, because when this object debuted on the market, it was purchased by a museum. About a year later, the museum realized that it was a fake and launched their own investigation, decided to deaccession it. The dealer, who had unwittingly, innocently been exploited by the faker, took the object back, and the Chipstone Foundation decided to receive it as a gift and to use it as an opportunity to talk about how we can grow from the honest mistake of a field of American decorative arts thinking that this was real. And that reception history is what has begun to fascinate me more as a curator as I start to sit with this object and research it. Because when it debuted on the Americana folk art market in 2015, it was enthusiastically embraced. And even beyond this Americana Dec Arts world, it was even featured in Hyperallergic. And its value, as it was perceived, lay in the way that this memorial object was seen to express the Bingham's trauma. And even PTSD was used. And his suicide, the story of his suicide, became evidence of his mourning his brother. But what strikes me is that it was a memorial object that affirmed only one way of remembering the war, as a struggle of white soldiers. And unremarked upon at the time was how much this object centered the narrative of white soldiers to the total exclusion of anything having to do with emancipation, or even Black soldiers, many of whom fought in the war. So I think that, the fact that that wasn't a red flag and that this became an object that seemed to really represent, be an iconic Civil War object, becomes more telling when you think about it in the context of the 150th anniversary of the Civil War. So in this period from around 2011 to 2015, in this period, you get this reassessing of the significance of the Civil War in a way that was really exciting beyond the Dec Arts world. 12 Years a Slave comes out, Black Lives Matter, the movement is created. One of the most influential writings of the 21st century, Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Case for Reparations, is published. And this is all happening in this period of intensive reassessing of the Civil War and its legacy. But what's happening in the American Dec Arts world is the focus on this object and narratives of white soldiers. So it's this kind of interesting story of fakery, because it was an emblem of memory, but it's also perpetuating forgetting. And we're really excited to contextualize it, thinking about Frederick Douglass and the work he did, even in the 1860s, of talking about the fact that the goal of the war is abolition. The goal of the war is equality. And to Tiffany's point just now about these histories have always been there. This is an example of Douglass's words around the war. And the way that the war is misremembered through objects like this is a struggle that's been going on since the 1860s. So, we think about this as an opportunity to ask whose heroism and trauma and memory is acknowledged in decorative arts galleries, and how can we grow that, the kinds of perspectives that we honor in our galleries. So we've collected some of our lessons that we've been thinking about. I don't know, Tiffany, if you have anything more you'd like to say, but that is the end of our talk about Troubled Like the Restless Sea. Come to Milwaukee. See it in person.
Thank you both. So we've got a few questions for you, if you don't mind. Let's see, I will start with the first one. Let's see, this says the history of American decorative arts is one of the last bastions of white supremacy in scholarship. How do we begin to integrate broader stories into the study of American objects?
That's a great question. And I'm just I took a quick second there to just sort of reflect upon my own experiences in the American decorative arts field, and just things that I've seen since I began doing this work as a student years ago. And towards that part of the question that asks, how do we begin to integrate broader stories into the study of American objects? This past, I think it was spring, there was an exhibition at the Historic New Orleans collection down in New Orleans, Louisiana. And one of the very first, and it was the decorative arts of the Gulf South. And one of the very first panels you saw when you entered the space, it was just the words, every object in this gallery was made by an enslaved person or purchased with the profits that came from enslaving people. And that stuck with me. I've been thinking about that panel since I first saw it. But just this idea that we have to interrogate the stories behind these sources. And that's one of the things that we do. I'm sorry, the stories behind these objects. And that's one of the things that we do with the Black Craftspeople Digital Archive, is to show people just how widespread Black craftspeople were, and just the amount of things that they were creating and the amount of skills that they had. And when you're sitting there looking at all of these archival documents and records and objects, you have to reckon with the truth of the matter, right? And one thing that that's really been sticking with me the last few weeks in the work that I do is this phrase I mentioned to Ruthie, I think it was yesterday or the day before, where I was like, just because there is an absence of objects does not mean that there is an absence of stories, right? Because one of the things that the decorative arts field loves to do is to sort of stick on this idea of, well, we have to know the maker, right? We have to know the maker of the object. We can't consider any of these other possibilities. And the one thing that I'm encouraging people to do is actually consider those other possibilities, right? Because we know it was happening. We know it was going on. We know that Black craftspeople are working in shops everywhere and all of those sorts of things. So yeah, it's really pushing the truth. And one of my favorite things to tell people all the time is you can argue with the primary sources, don't argue with me. Ruthie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I mean, that was so well said, Tiffany. The only thing I would say is that I would add is that it's also about investing in new voices in the field. And when I say investing, I say investing because it's about mentorship and it's about distributing budgets. It is an investment, and it's work that is really important. And I don't mean to suggest that diverse members of the field would solely focus on issues surrounding people of color. In fact, I think it's more about bringing their expertise, their personal and professional expertise, to entire collections of objects.
Thank you. The next one is more of a comment than a question, but I'll just read it to you. It says, this was an incredibly thought-provoking talk. Thank you for giving us so much to think about. The next one is, have you been able to link the skills that enslaved people brought to the New World, besides rice farming, with the crafts that they had in Africa?
Oh, absolutely. So there's a great amount of cultural retention, right? And you can see it in a variety of objects that are displayed in today's museums. everything from pottery to metalworking, to the way that buildings are constructed, all have those influences from Africa that folks brought with them. I think it's very important to remember that just because they crossed the Atlantic Ocean, that they didn't forget where they came from, right? And they used that knowledge to impact what they did when they arrived here. One of the most recent pieces of scholarship that I read about this very recently was on some pottery fragments found, I believe they were found in South Carolina. And they had this sort of ribbing pattern made onto them that you would have used, I believe it's a reed, like the plant, like a reed, to make that particular ribbing pattern. But what was so interesting about that being found on a plantation in South Carolina was that there is also pottery in Africa with that same sort of ribbing pattern in it, right? That's contemporary to what's happening in South Carolina. And so I think that that's one of the most recent examples that I've read of sort of the way that culture and craft was brought from Africa to the Americas.
I would add just one other anecdote, because it also makes me think about the structure of museums, which is that the first patterned fabric manufactured in the South, this is before the Civil War, this is around 1850, the master dyer, as in D-Y-E-R, in charge of the color of the pattern, it was a plaid, was an enslaved man named Washington Caswell. And so, and one of the patterns that they were making was a blue and white check, and they're using indigo. And we don't have documentary evidence, but we know that indigo, the expertise about using indigo as a dye, came to South Carolina via enslaved craftspeople. And then around 100 years later, you have this process taking place and bringing great wealth to North Carolina. The reason I mention museums is because that story is very beautifully told at a small historical society in Alamance County, North Carolina. And when I see a place like that that has very few resources doing that work, it raises the question of why are more museums, art museums with kind of capital in many ways, not pushing those narratives more forward into their galleries.
Thank you. Next is for Tiffany. How have you gone about researching for the Black craftspeople database, and how much level of detail have you been able to uncover?
Sure. So our primary resource base right now is runaway ads seeking the return of self-emancipated people. And one of the things that we do is when we get those runaway ads, we interrogate them because we're interested in place. We're interested in all of the crafts or trades that are listed in those advertisements. We're listed in the names of enslavers and all of those sorts of things. And then we break those ads down into sort of a pattern that allows us to look at the information as a whole. And so one of the things that we do, of course, is that we work with a lot of students. We work with, just this past summer, we had 2 very good interns from the Cooperstown MA program, and they were helping us research Black craftspeople in New York. And they used a variety of sources, from those types of advertisements to city directories and census records and other newspaper records to begin to help us piece these people's lives back together, and so that we could share that with everyone. Beyond those sources, we also look at private papers, people's own private documentation of what's happening to the people that they enslave and what's happening on their plantations. And that usually includes a lot of things like ledgers, right? With just people's names listed and their trades. And we've also begun looking at wills, right? Because you pick up a lot of those craftspeople stories in people's wills and estate records.
Thank you. The next question I had was, in what other ways does the Chipstone Foundation use their collection to tell underrepresented stories and kind of encourage people to think about objects in new ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. Many ways. Really, that work has been, the foundation of that has been laid and carried out by John Brown, who's our chief curator and director. And I think he's really created a multi-pronged approach. One thing is that we continue to have different exhibition projects that talk about these stories. Another is that we publish journals, Ceramics in America and American Furniture, that often talk about these histories. And then we also do education. We teach and we collaborate. We like to collaborate with especially higher education faculty and really get an opportunity to debut these ideas and arguments past really rigorous and invested college and graduate students. So yeah, and I feel like in some ways doing that work is equivalent to curating in the ability you have to really plant the seeds and spread the kind of word and also learn from the students.
Thank you both. I think that was our last question and perfectly on time. Oh, I see people writing things in the chat. Let's see. Not a question, just a realization. We wouldn't have even needed tea tables and teapots and the whole rituals around tea without the brutally insatiable supply chain for tea itself and sugar and coffee and chocolate.
It's very true.
All right. Well, I think that kind of wraps up our evening. Thank you so much to Tiffany and Ruthie for joining us this evening for this really great discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed the talk. Please consider making a donation to enable us to continue to offer free programming. Gifts in any amount are always appreciated. Thanks again for joining us this evening for our last lecture in this Talking About Race Matters Join the Conversation series. I'm sure we'll be picking up another one relatively soon. Recordings for all 5 of these lectures will be available on our website and our YouTube, so check those out. Stay tuned and follow us on social media and subscribe to our e-newsletter as we continue virtual and in-person programming and events throughout the year. We hope that we can see you all soon, and thank you again for joining us. Have a great night.